The cold steel screams as it hits the furnace, turning bright orange in the belly of the beast, ready to become a weapon of pure war. Hydraulic hammers smash down with 50 tons of force, flattening the glowing metal into a shape that will soon deliver swift death from above the clouds. Sparks fly like angry hornets in this dark pit, scorching the leather aprons of men who know that sweat and blood are the price of freedom. We keep the heat steady at 2,000 degrees, cooking the impurities right out of the iron until the molecular bond is stronger than a diamond. A rough cylinder emerges from the smoke and fire, a hollow tube that will guide the Flamingo FP-5 straight into the heart of the enemy tank. We dunk the glowing steel into a bath of dirty oil, the hiss of steam filling the foundry as the metal hardens into a killer's spine. The foreman checks the grain structure with a critical eye, looking for any weakness that might cause a catastrophic failure when the trigger finally gets pulled. It gets hoisted onto the heavy lathe, the chains rattling like skeletons in a crypt, ready for the first cut that peels away the rough skin. Carbide teeth bite into the spinning steel, sending blue chips flying across the floor as we carve the Flamingo FP-5 from a solid block of hate. Ain't no room for error in this gritty shop, cause a millimeter off means a missile blowing up in your face instead of hitting the target. The long drill bit screams as it pushes through the core, opening up the throat of this beast so it can scream defiance at the sky. Smoke rises from the cutting oil as friction fights back, but our machines don't stop until the barrel is hollow and hungry for a heavy payload. Now we cut the grooves inside the tube, the rifling that spins the projectile like a football so it flies true through the wind and rain. We shine a light down the dark tunnel, checking the lands and grooves to make sure every twist is perfect for the Flamingo's deadly flight path. The outside gets shaved down to reduce weight, stripping away the fat until only the muscle remains sleek and ready for the chaotic battlefield of tomorrow. We cut threads on the breech end, deep and sharp locking points where the pressure of ignition will try to tear this whole thing apart violently. A rough polish takes off the burrs, leaving a surface that looks like gunmetal gray, death cold to the touch, but born from intense white fire. The hydraulic press stamps a serial number deep into the steel, giving this Flamingo FP-5 a name and a history before it ever fires a shot. We blast it with sand to rough up the surface, preparing the metal to take a coat of paint that hides it in the deep brush. The barrel is finished and cooling on the rack, waiting for the receiver to join the party so we can build a machine of pure destruction. The receiver block gets clamped down hard on the mill table, a solid chunk of steel that is about to lose half its weight in chips. A high-speed cutter drops from the carousel like a hawk, spinning at 10,000 RPM to chew through the metal with a high-pitched mechanical shriek. Coolant sprays everywhere like white blood, washing away the razor-sharp confetti as we carve out the intricate housing for the Flamingo's trigger and firing group. We aren't making toys here, we are holding tolerances to 1/10 of a thousandth because if the bolt jams, a soldier doesn't come home. The machine digs deep pockets into the metal, creating the space where the bolt carrier will ride back and forth when the gunpowder finally ignites. We slice out the ejection port on the side, a jagged window where the spent brass will get kicked out hot and smoking onto the dirt. Now we mill the rail onto top a ladder of jagged teeth that will hold the optics steady while the heavy recoil tries to shake them loose. The machine stops and we pull the piece, grabbing a file to knock off the sharp edges that would slice a man's hand to the bone. We drill the pinholes through the side perfectly aligned so the hammer and trigger rotate on a dime without a single hint of gritty friction. The receiver goes into the oven to bake, hardening the surface so it can take a beating in the mud without warping or cracking under stress. Sparks shower the floor as we grind the bolt face, making sure it grabs the rim of the cartridge like a bulldog that won't let go. We fit the extractor claw by hand, testing the spring tension until it snaps back with enough force to rip a stuck shell right out. The welder strikes an arc, fusing the charging handle to the carrier with a bead of molten steel that glows blue in the dark factory air. We take a polishing stone to the feed ramp, smoothing out the path so the ammunition slides into the chamber like grease on a hot skillet. We bore out the gas port, a tiny hole that bleeds off pressure to cycle the action, balancing the violent explosion with pure mechanical rhythm. Taps turn slowly into the metal cutting threads for the screws that keep the whole assembly from rattling apart when the shockwaves start hitting the frame. A caliper measures the distance between the walls, verifying that the magazine will lock in tight and feed rounds without skipping a beat in a firefight. We dip parts in acid to etch the surface stripping oils so the protective finish bonds to the metal at a deep molecular level. The machined parts sit on the bench, a collection of cold steel puzzles waiting for the hands that will turn them into a functioning war machine. The metal work is done and the noise dies down, leaving us with the smell of ozone and the anticipation of fitting wood to the steel. We leave the grind of metal for the smell of sawdust, grabbing heavy blocks of walnut that are tough enough to absorb the recoil shock. The bandsaw screams a different tune, now slicing through the timber to rough out a shape that fits a soldier's shoulder like a rock. Rasps dig into the grain, peeling away the bark and the soft spots until we find the hard heart of the wood underneath. Sandpaper smooths out the splinters because you can't aim straight if the stock is chewing up your cheek while you look down the sights. We stain it dark with a mix of chemicals and oil, sealing the pores against the mud, the blood, and the freezing rain. Now comes the marriage of wood and steel, forcing the receiver into the bed with a mallet until the fit is tight and true. We drive the heavy bolts through the timber, locking the mechanism down so it doesn't shift a millimeter when the Flamingo starts kicking hard. The trigger group slides in with a satisfying click, a complex little box of springs and levers that turns intention into sudden action. We grease the pins and slide them home, the heavy hammer connecting with the sear, waiting for the finger that will drop the hammer. A quick function check proves the safety, works clicking back and forth with a crisp snap that tells you this machine is safe and lethal. We screw on the pistol grip, checking the angle to make sure the operator can hold this heavy beast steady when the adrenaline dumps. The foregrip gets clamped on the front, giving the shooter something to hang on to while the barrel heats up enough to fry an egg. Every gap gets checked with a feeler gauge because if the barrel touches the wood, the harmonics get messed up and the shot goes wild. We mount the sights on the rail, tightening the hex screws until the iron is fused to the receiver, unmovable and dead on target. A thick coat of grease goes on the bolt carrier, slicking up the rails, so the action cycles faster than the human eye can see. The return spring fights us as we compress it into the tube, storing up the kinetic energy needed to strip the next round off. We rack the slide back hard, listening to the metallic clack that echoes off the walls, the sound of a weapon ready for war. The balance point is checked right at the magwell, ensuring the Flamingo FP-5 doesn't feel like a heavy anchor in a tired man's hands. It's fully assembled, now a Frankenstein mix of organic wood and industrial steel, sitting heavy on the bench and looking meaner than a junkyard dog. The builder wipes a rag over the finished product, clearing off the last fingerprints before we haul this hardware out to the firing line. We drag the crates out to the mud pit back at the factory where the air smells like sulfur and the ground is covered in brass. The Rangemaster racks the bolt, sliding a live warhead into the chamber with a sound that signals the end of talk and the start of noise. He shoulders the heavy weight, squinting through the sights at a rusted tank hulk sitting quietly 500 yards down the torn-up muddy field. The trigger breaks like a glass rod, and the world explodes in a violent wave that rattles your teeth and shakes the ground beneath your boots. A streak of fire rips through the air, the rocket motor screaming as it accelerates past the speed of sound, hunting for metal to destroy. Downrange, the old armor plate disintegrates in a flash of orange fire and black smoke as the shaped charge punches a hole straight through the steel. The shooter rides the recoil, checking the ejection pattern as the hot casing spins out and lands sizzling in a puddle of dirty rainwater. We don't stop at one, we dump the whole magazine, sending round after round downrange to see if the barrel melts or the receiver cracks. Smoke pours off the handguard, the wood charring slightly from the intense heat of the barrel. But the Flamingo keeps spitting fire without a single jam. We walk down to the target to inspect the damage, looking at the grouping to make sure this thing hits where you point it every time. The sights were a little low, so we crank the elevation screw, dialing in the trajectory until it is driving tacks at 300 meters. We throw the weapon into the mud, grinding grit into the action, then pick it up and fire to prove it won't fail in the trenches. We load a proof round packed with extra powder to overpressure the chamber, seeing if the steel holds or explodes right in our sweating hands. The blast is deafening, a shockwave that punches you in the chest, but the receiver holds together and the bolt stays locked tight against the force. We check the spent brass for signs of bulging or splitting, reading the metal tea leaves to ensure the headspace is safe for the end user. As the sun goes down, we test the muzzle flash, watching the fireball light up the dusk to see if it gives away the shooter's position. The barrel is too hot to touch, glowing a dull red in the twilight, cooling down with the ticking sound of contracting metal after the abuse. The foreman gives a nod, a silent seal of approval that means this batch of killers passed the torture test and is ready for the front. We gather up the weapons, wiping the carbon off the bolts and smelling the distinct odor of burnt gunpowder that clings to everything we wear. The testing is done and the silence returns to the valley, but the journey isn't over until these Flamingos are boxed up and shipped out. We drag them inside and slather them in cosmoline, thick brown grease that keeps rust away during the long ride to the frozen front lines. We wrap the steel in heavy wax paper, sealing the weapon like a mummy, so it wakes up fresh and ready to kill when opened. Carpenters are hammering together rough pine crates, building the coffins that will carry these machines across the border and into the hands of waiting soldiers. We stack them 10 deep in the box muzzle to buttstock, optimizing space because every inch counts when you are shipping heavy logistics to war. We throw in the spare magazines and a greasy instruction sheet, though most of the boys receiving these already know exactly how to make them sing. The lid gets nailed shut with heavy blows, sealing the darkness and barbarishness inside until the crate hits the mud and the crowbar rips it open again. A stencil gets slapped on the wood and we spray black paint over it, marking the contents as high explosive ordnance for immediate priority transport. The forklift groans as it lifts the pallet tires, flattening under the weight of 1,000 potential explosions stacked up in a neat wooden tower. The truck driver is smoking a cigarette by the loading dock, looking at the cargo with tired eyes that have seen too many miles of road. We ratchet the straps down tight over the canvas, making sure the load doesn't shift when the truck hits the potholes on the supply route. The manifest gets signed with a greasy pen, transferring custody of this lethal hardware from the builders to the haulers who risk it all tonight. The diesel engine roars to life, coughing black smoke into the night air as the transmission engages and the heavy wheels start to slowly roll. We watch the taillights fade into the darkness, knowing that our part is done, but the real work for the Flamingo is just getting started. It started as a pile of scrap metal and a block of wood, but now it is a precision instrument designed to defend a homeland. Somewhere in a frozen trench, a soldier is waiting for this delivery, counting his last rounds and praying for the sound of our heavy truck. These crates aren't just filled with steel and gunpowder, they are packed with hope and the means to push the invader back across the line. The truck is gone, but the hammers don't stop because the war is hungry and we have quotas to meet before the sun comes up. We sweep the floor and grease the machines, prepping the line for the next run of steel that will be forged into the Flamingo FP-5. Dirt under the fingernails and iron in the lungs is the badge of honor we wear, knowing we built the tools that keep freedom alive. This is the foundry of resistance, where we turn raw hate into heavy firepower, one handmade missile at a time, until the final victory is won.